So we would always, after weigh-ins, we'd go out to eat and take the bus there and go out to eat. And so I think, everyone got $3. But as time went on, we'd still go out to eat, but then the Booster Club wasn't able to give everyone money to go out to eat in the years going past. And I remember Gerry would inevitably, if he saw a kid that wasn't eating or didn't have food, he would just say, no, you order whatever you want, and then he would put it on his bill. Gerry was not independently wealthy by any means, but so this was a real sacrifice for him, because he was stretching it a lot of times anyways. So, but he would just take any kid on there that didn't have the funds to get something to eat, and.
This is the Buffalo Community Podcast, all about the greatest small town in the USA, the people in it, and how it all works together. Here are your hosts, Tyler Reese and Mark Benzer.
Hey everybody, it's the Buffalo Community Podcast, and we've got a super special episode here for you. We're going to dub it the Gerry Bakke episode. A lot of you have known, all 250,000 viewers of you. I mean, that's how big of a reach we have here, which is, tiny compared to Gerry Bakke's reach. But it's basically rest in peace. We're going to tell some great stories and just kind of honor a local legend, and that had a lot of impacts, not just only in the wrestling community, but in the Buffalo community and, I guess the upper Midwest as well. Mm-hmm. So we've got some guests here with us. Jason, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Jason Maurer. I coach wrestling for Buffalo. Former head coach and helping out with some junior varsity this year.
I'm Dan Scherber. I started coaching in '88, kind of finished up in '99. I coached with Gerry. Started out as assistant and then was co-head coach with him towards the end. And then since then I've come back and done a couple of more stints coaching with Buffalo, with the wrestling team since then. So, and Gerry was my wrestling coach as well. So
Mine too.
Yeah.
Mine too.
And he forced his way into the gym when I was wrestling. So, he was never my official coach, but I mean, it was always. I think there was a time when it was, Bakke, you just got to settle down just a little bit. Like, could you not get onto the mat? I mean, I don't care if you're yelling, and I'm glad that you're here watching us, but please don't come onto the mat. So that was kind of at the end of, he was kind of winding down, but still very much involved when I was wrestling in the.
Yeah, he was winding down in 2000, and then I brought him back.
20 years ago.
2012, he was back for 6 more years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Mark, he's your uncle. Mm-hmm. Yep. So that was, extra special of one. What a great man, and one being in the family. I'm sure you have family stories as well, but we'll try and stick to wrestling and in school.
Yeah, kind of. We talked about it before the show. A little bit about, what do we talk about? Well, it's hard to really write a script for how this is exactly going to go. But obviously we go back quite a ways to, maybe I should know, but Dan, 1980?
Yeah, fall of 80.
Fall of 80, Gerry Bakke comes to town as the head wrestling coach. I don't know what kind of a program he inherited. Maybe you can kind of fill us in on kind of where things were at that time to...
Coach Nolan was here before that, and that's right before I kind of entered into the program, but my brother John was already wrestling. But coming in that year, Gerry had inherited Mike Habish as a state champ. He was on the team. And also on that team were Terry Sanders, who ended up being a state champion. Rick Habish, Mike Wright was another state tournament wrestler. So, yeah, there was a strong group of wrestlers here already. It was a strong wrestling community when he got here.
Yep. Yeah. So not a terrible situation to step into.
No.
And coming off of some success in Nashua, Iowa, where he was awarded a Coach of the Year award, and I think maybe had some state champs down there. But but obviously a big personality, a big character to come into town and say, hey, I'm your new wrestling coach. And shortly thereafter, within 8 years, you're jumping on board as assistant coach and kind of developed probably as strong of a relationship with Gerry as anybody outside of the family. And so,
yeah, I'd come to watch in 1980. It would have been December of 1980, last match before Christmas. I was at the match, and after the match was over, we do like every junior high kid. Mm-hmm. I was in 8th grade at the time. We started launching basketballs at each other and throwing up half court shots and being disruptive.
Right.
And my dad was talking to Gerry at the time, and then they called me over and said, "Hey, Dan, come here." And he brings me over and he said, "This is Mr. Bakke, and we've been talking, and you're going to start wrestling on Monday when you get back from Christmas." I said, "Okay, sounds good." And then I remember just taking off and just launching a basketball at one of my buddies, and not thinking anything of it. That was at that moment, meeting him then would be a lifelong relationship that we'd have, and so that's kind of how it started with me.
Right. That's one of my favorite stories. I think it's a good story to kick things off with. This is Gerry Bakke, and you're wrestling on Monday. Okay, where's the basketball?
Yeah.
Awesome. Jason, you come on board, being a Buffalo High School grad, a 1998 Buffalo High School grad, wrestling in the program.
Yeah.
Kind of some going on to teach and doing some stints after graduating from St. Cloud.
Yeah.
But always wrestling was part of every stop you had along the way.
Yeah, I started in Redwood Falls in 2002. I was there for about 3 years. Short stop in Bakke, and then I was in St. Francis for 6 years, and then I came back to Buffalo in 2012.
Sure. So kind of wrestling for Gerry, the influence of your wanting to teach and coach. Why don't maybe talk about that? If there wasn't,
unfortunately, I never got to have Gerry as a teacher because I think both times I was in his class, he had some sort of heart issue. So I ended up with his daughter, Heather, which was fine, but, in high school, you wanted the Gerry Bakke experience because it was
an experience.
A trip. I mean, it was something. I mean, I remember being like a freshman and sophomore, hearing the stories and just wanting that. And then to get in his class and have him for like a day, it was just like, oh. And then I became his TA my senior year. And he had me tabulating scorebooks from the 70s. And it was just like, oh, boy. So, there was always something to do. I mean, and I remember coming back in 2001 after I got hired at Redwood and just talking about what I could do to help build a program that me and another guy were starting pretty fresh, and always an ear. I mean, we spent hours on the phone, especially my first year, just kind of trying to figure out where exactly we were, because there was a few years there where there was a lot of turmoil. I mean, a lot of turnover. The numbers weren't great. So, and he always had great ideas. The problem was if you didn't listen to his ideas, sometimes he would get upset. I'll never forget. It was like my second year, and we finally had a kind of competitive team, and we were in the gym, and we had just won a duel, which was kind of big for us because we didn't win a lot that first couple of years. And I remember it was a close match, and I had Gerry Bakke to my left and Andrew Newman to my right. And it was your nephew Cole. No, Ian, sorry. No, it was Cole. It was Cole. And our philosophy was to put everybody down because we wanted to get that free point.
Yeah.
But Gerry knew that Cole was so good on top.
Uh-huh.
And we were talking about this before the pod. Gerry didn't necessarily care about long term on most matches. It was just like, we're going to get this win somehow. So I remember looking over, and Gerry says, "Put him up." And I look over to Newman, and Newman says, "Put him down." And I'm I'm torn between what do you do? Do you side with your assistant? Do you side with the guy who got you into wrestling? What do you do? So I remember I chose down, and Gerry didn't agree with me on that. And, God!
Hit you with
Then we had a
Spain.
little talk, and that was about it. You know, I said it's a hard position to be in, but I got to choose what I think is right because
you're the head coach.
so. But that was fun. I mean, things like that, I'll look back at it and just cherish because it was just. I mean, I remember one time you were probably on staff. It was probably the 90s. And you and somebody else were like holding Gerry back from the ref because you could actually like yell at a ref back then. And he did some kind of dislocation and he popped right out of his suit coat. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And it was like, wow. Man, he was.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly a gymnast, so.
No.
So for him to make a move like that.
It was pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a few disagreements over time on position and what to take, but he was pretty masterful on setting up lineups. I remember before the 1990 section final match against Wilmer, when we're trying to put this lineup together to go against Wilmer, who was really a strong team that year. That's a year, another one of those years where we're ranked, in the top 5, fluctuating in and down in there. And Wilmer was probably ranked right above us or behind us any day of the week. And we just sat down at Hardee's in Wilmer and just ground for 2 hours on doing
Moving
the
this
math
guy,
and putting this guy here and this guy here and moving this guy here and where we were going to, if you won the flip, what we were going to take, odd or even, because that obviously determines who sends their guy out first on what matches. So, it was, he loved, I think, I look back and I think that's what he really loved was that cat and mouse game. We did that with St. Michael throughout the 80s. I just remember all those St. Michael matches being decided by a point or two either way, and it was that cat and mouse game of moving guys up and down. And I remember really, distinctly after we lost in 90 to Apple Valley in the semifinals when Dusty got hurt, when he was ahead against Herndon and got hurt. Everybody was just kind of devastated. I remember being at the Radisson that night getting ready to load up on the bus on Saturday night. That loss would have been the day before. But, I mean, we're sitting out there and we're kind of sitting against the wall and we're still just kind of stunned by that loss, and it really bites. And I just remember Gerry being really, could tell he was really down, and Jim Short from Simley walked by. And, of course, he's a legendary coach who doesn't say much. To get a compliment from him would be, pretty unusual because you'd be lucky if he says 2 words to you. But he had a long history with Gerry at the Osseo tournament and wrestling over the years. And I remember him just looking down at Gerry, and he just said, "You're a good coach, Bakke," and just kind of nodded at him, and Bach just kind of...
Yeah.
Bach still didn't want to talk about it even to Jim Short. He just kind of went...
Yeah.
And then just kind of moved on. But, that's kind of how his peers thought of him, too. They knew he was kind of a mastermind, because when we showed up that morning at the scales, I don't think, because that was back in the day when you could, as long as a kid was certified for a weight, you could, wrestle him anywhere, anytime. And
maybe it was a little less scientific back then.
Yeah.
As far as weight certifications.
Yeah. And I think, and Gerry and I talked about this since, but when we showed up that morning and with Rob Triplett down like 2 weight classes from what he would normally wrestle, and I'm sure they thought there's no way, because we weighed him in the day before, and I don't remember, it was right around 135, and we talked about it the night before what we should do, and Rob just said, Rob was great. He said, "I'll do anything for the team, wherever you want me to go," because he really wanted it. Too, he was a state qualifier, but he wanted a state championship. And Gerry and I kind of went over it, and then he asked, Rob, do you think you could get down? I don't know if it was 30 or 25 or what it was.
Yeah.
He just said, yeah, I can do it.
I can do it.
And he said,
7% of your body weight.
we're going to have to start running. And then, of course, we're in St. Paul,
Right.
where you're going to run. So we couldn't let him run alone. So then I suited up with him, and we left the St. Paul Radisson that night. We hopped outside, and I'm sure it wasn't. You probably couldn't do this today, but we just started running. I think it was the Robert Street Bridge, and ran over to almost to South St. Paul. And we ran for hours, and then came back and checked weight. And so the next morning we show up at weigh-ins, and Triplet has made weight, and
Apple Valley.
he just said,
jaw hit the floor.
because all the head coaches, Apple Valley, Simley, Osseo, they're all sitting around watching. So where did everyone weigh in at? Everyone wants to know, and you're going to get a copy of the weight sheet when the
Right.
tournament proceeds. But everybody, and just how the jaws kind of dropped when they said, "What did Triplet make?"
Yeah.
And they're like, because that's when they knew we were really going for it.
Right.
There was a couple other spots where we want to get wrestlers into different spots and different weights that didn't really work out for us for that to happen that year. But the way it worked out, the way everything was put together, that formula would have won. Mm-hmm. I think hindsight's 20/20, but obviously if Dusty even doesn't lose to Herndon, he ends up getting slammed.
Yeah.
And they don't call the slam, so he injury defaults. So he's ahead. If he's ahead and it's a 9-point swing, we end up losing by a point or two. All Dusty has to do is not get pinned by Herndon,
Right.
really, and he obviously wouldn't have. They would have went on to meet in the state semifinals that night. They were scheduled to meet and wrestle again in the afternoon, and then State High School League. Well, they kind of came over to Matt's side when Dusty was down and said, no, he's not. The doctor was there, Anderson, and of course, then we wanted to get him wrestling that night. We're like, okay, well, can't we wrestle him that night? They weren't going to let him wrestle because we wanted it for Dusty to be able to move
Right.
it too. But I guess I'm getting sideways there, getting distracted. But yeah, just setting up lineups like that and how
Yep.
he was kind of a master at it, and people kind of knew that. And the people in the section, Region 2AA at the time, everybody never knew what to expect when we showed up at weigh-ins, and they were playing. They had to start. It forced them to start playing the same game too.
Right.
And he still had that. I mean, when my first couple of years, we didn't have Dusty and whoever, but we had guys that we could move around a little bit. And in my mind, I'm trying to win the match, but I'm also trying to make sure that the 15 guys we have out for wrestling are content, and no one is, it's a little different when you're rated in the state and there's 40 guys in the wrestling room. We had 20 guys in the room, so you're trying to kind of massage that. But sometimes the things Gerry would see in a lineup it was unreal. I couldn't believe it sometimes with what he could see and what he could do. And
But it was fun too, because to your point, from when Gerry got here in that class of 80-81, they went undefeated during the regular season. I mean, Gerry really had a lineup where you could do that, where you could, when you have a lineup filled with, state champions, state qualifiers, and then a solid core to the rest of it.
yeah.
They went 12-1 that first year. They ended up losing to Waseca in the finals, and then 82 was down, but then they're back, fairly strong in 83, and then 84 is the first state team. 85, I think we only lost one match during the regular season, and then ended up having some injuries and losing in the section tournament. And then, of course, they had that great run of teams. But
Yeah,
he always
early
had.
90s.
There was a lot of teams there where it was fun to do that kind of cat and mouse game, because it really, you were in every match.
You had the pieces to do it.
Uh,
We had asked some people to send in some stories, some Gerry stories. We could sit here and do 3 hours of Gerry stories, but
And it might happen.
might happen. But one of them kind of stands out above all of them.
So Jim Millboy Miller sent me this back in September, and I think there's a video out there too. I think he gave a nice tribute video
with Dan Gable.
So yeah, with Dan Gable.
With Dan Gable,
wrestling. Yeah. Oh yeah, that major part of the story there.
Yeah.
He goes. Well, I thought I'd share my favorite Bakke memory. He goes, I'm presently the director of the Dan Gable Museum. Before that, coached for 37 years. In 78, when he was 24 years old, and a new head coach at Charles City High in Iowa. Coach Bakke was a head coach in Nashua, 10 miles away. He brought his team over 3 times that year to work out. I had not met him before that, but he immediately started talking about my wrestling career. He seriously knew more scores, details about my career than I ever remembered. I was a 2 times D2 national champion and a 2 times D1 All-American. The last time Bakke had the team over, he asked if I would do him a favor. I said, sure, what is it? He said he wanted me to wrestle, and he wanted me to go all out, not hold back. He wanted to feel what it liked to wrestle a national champ. I said, are you sure? He said he was positive. So the next 3 minutes, I threw Coach around mercilessly, and he had a smile on his face the entire time. When we laid down on the mat, he said, that was awesome. Thank you. I've been a big fan of Coach Bakke ever since, and by the end of that season, Bakke was named Iowa Coach of the Year. So, yeah, Jim Miller, thanks for sharing that. And I think that's amazing that he remembers that, 40,
right.
50 years ago now. A couple of my stories, I'm gonna tell one from him being in the classroom, because I was lucky enough to have him as a coach, and I was a teacher, and during wrestling season. So as his very unconventional teacher, but if you didn't want to do anything, you just mentioned anything wrestling, and boom, for the next 90 minutes, no homework. But there were some kids that got pretty hard down on wrestling, and just some really negative things, and I don't think he realized how much that would have upset Bakke. And he goes, oh man, he had a breakdown. But it was, but he kind of turned it into a learning experience for not just wrestlers. It was people just like, he hit really deep. I don't think he'd be able to talk about most of the stuff he talked about in class. It's just not, I don't want to say not appropriate. It's way too controversial.
It's way too deep.
Controversial. It's not PC, but I think he made a lasting impression on nearly all of his students with that. And so my senior year, I had him. I was fortunate enough to qualify for state a couple times, and I made a decent run. I went to second place. I lost 8-6. But he goes, Reese, I wrestled varsity in 7th grade, and I lost just about every single time. So in 7th grade, my goal when I was talking to Bakke, I said, I want to be the most winning wrestler in Buffalo. That was my goal. I should have said I want to be state champ, and then the wins would have came. But ended up taking second, ended up breaking the record. But my final record, I think it was 118-76. He goes, Reese, if you can find anybody at the national tournament that has more wins than you and more losses, I'm going to give you $80. And boy, it was awesome.
$80.
I didn't take a national. Yeah, it must have been whatever was in his wallet at that time. But it was fun because to go to this national championship or national tournament, you had to be a champ or a runner-up to be invited to it. And I didn't take it very serious. I bumped up a weight and then went with Metcalf. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is great. It's just tremendous wrestlers. But you got to see everybody from around the nation and their career records. And I found one kid that had more wins and more losses than me, and I thought, here it is, Bakke. He came to my grad party, and he gave me the $80 plus an extra $20 for the grad gift.
Yeah.
80 was the bet. 80 was the bet.
Paying off the bet.
Yeah, it was, his sayings, I currently coach at the middle school, and it's on the wall. It's, you got to go.
Yeah.
And I think everybody can do an impersonation of him. And touchdown bingo. You don't have to be a wrestler to know that. Yeah. Touchdown bingo, meaning, yep, it's done. You're good. Do this, and it's going to be touchdown bingo for you. So it's always kind of just been that looking up to him, and you never knew where it was going to go or how long that conversation was going to be, or if he was going to wrestle you, whether it was at Cub Foods or in the wrestling match. So it was pretty fun.
Yeah, and you talked about him being in the classroom and his unique approach to being a teacher. I think one thing that stood out, and I think I probably knew it, but it was confirmed, like at his funeral and stuff, that it wasn't just former wrestlers, and it wasn't just wrestlers from the early 90s. It was former students who never wrestled a day in their life, former students who never played a sport a day in their life, and former wrestlers who graduated in 2019, along with Greeno from St. Michael and Jim Jackson, and just a wide variety of people from around the area, different backgrounds, and
not only that, I was reminded on Facebook by his daughter was how much he did with the special needs community and adults. I mean, I remember Gerry bringing 3 or 4 of his clients to my grad party. I mean, he always had clients with him when he wasn't in school.
Yeah, and that was actually something we actually talked about a little bit as a family, and probably that's an area you think so much wrestling because that's how he thought.
Yeah.
But, he really did have a large impact on the special needs community, on students that maybe were slipping through the cracks, that needed something different than what a traditional classroom was offering.
Well, and I remember, now this is back in the 80s, we would always go to the Buffalo House, which is currently where Culver's kind of is. But after we'd wait, especially for the Osseo tournament or something, and the Booster Club would give everyone $3 or something. So Bakke would have this money in his pocket.
Yeah.
And
currently paid bets off on.
So we would always, after weigh-ins, we'd go out to eat and take the bus there and go out to eat. And so I think everyone got $3. But as time went on, we'd still go out to eat, but then the Booster Club wasn't able to give everyone money to go out to eat in the years going past. And I remember Gerry would inevitably, if he saw a kid that wasn't eating or didn't have food, he would just say, no, you order whatever you want, and then he would put it on his bill. Gerry was not independently wealthy by any means, but so this was a real sacrifice for him, because he was stretching it a lot of times anyways. So, but he would just take any kid on there that didn't have the funds to get something to eat, and he that and another part of him, aspect of it, things I remember is, we always had to keep the locker room clean. It was an obsession of his, but if you saw his classroom, you wouldn't necessarily think those two things were analogous. But he would talk about how much we'd have to run for a piece of paper the size of a penny, but once in a while he would share the story, that his dad was a janitor, and when he was a young kid in high school, and people would just say, "Oh, the janitor will pick it up. The janitor will pick it up," and so that really hit him hard, and he hated that. Yeah. So when he would really make sure that the people were taken care of. The guy holding the door open, the janitor, the whatever. He really saw everybody, and then we were always obviously the last people out of every tournament because Gerry was talking to the guy changing light bulbs, and every wanted to know where they were from and who they knew. Well, I know someone from that town.
Oh, the wrestling team. They had that guy.
Do you know this guy?
Yeah. He was so tough. He was so tough.
But he was not just somebody who stayed in his lane. As far as obviously his lane was wrestling, but then he was really a kind person who he went out. He just everyone he met he took care of, and especially if he saw somebody that needed something.
Yep. Yeah. So. And I just kind of to that point of being the last one out, probably 10 years ago, my brother and I took Gerry to a Gophers wrestling match. They were wrestling the Badgers. And if you've been down around Williams Arena, handicap parking doesn't exist. And the U of M should do something about that. It's atrocious. Anyway, we drop Gerry off at the door. I go park, and after the match, Brandon and I run go get the car, and we come back to the door. Brandon runs in looking for Gerry. He can't find him. Well, he finally finds him. He's got Barry Davis cornered, who's the head coach of the Wisconsin Badgers wrestling program. I don't know if they know each other or not. Wouldn't surprise me if he did, but it also wouldn't surprise me if he had no idea who this guy was.
Yeah.
And so Brandon trying to say, I'm kind of parked awkwardly, like in this place I probably shouldn't be, kind of going like, we got to get you out to the car, and we got to get out of here. But no, he had to. I would love to hear what that conversation was like. I would love to hear how the conversation started. Because I'm sure Barry Davis probably didn't start that conversation.
No.
It's
probably like the Dan Gable conversation on the plane,
right?
Where Gerry is on a plane, and this is when he's young, and Gerry and Linda unfortunately had a child that passed away from crib death, so Gerry was on going to a seminar to talk about the effects of this and just kind of a support thing.
Right.
And he's on this plane, and he sees Dan Gable on this plane. So he walks
poor
up,
Dan.
and,
Which is like seeing Bradley Cooper. Like, I mean, this is
short of seeing Jesus on a plane. He goes up and asks the woman sitting next to him, "Hey, do you mind? This is Dan Gable." I'm sure she didn't know who she's talking to.
Dan's
Like,
wife.
I don't know who you're talking about. So, if I can sit here, so he sits there next to her and proceeds to talk to him for the whole length of the trip. And I just remember Gerry saying, by the end, Gable said, Gerry, I cannot talk any more wrestling. I can't do it. Let's talk about anything. Let's talk about crib death. Let's talk about whatever. I can't.
Yeah.
And he loved that he drove Dan Gable to the point of
He just couldn't do it.
I can't talk about this anymore.
Yeah,
Can we change the subject?
Even Dan Gable has limits of how much wrestling he can handle. Yeah,
That's fantastic.
I was just thinking, the word unconventional comes to mind, teaching, coaching, whatever, but I remember going to the Osseo tournament. I was a freshman, never really been to a high school individual tournament, and I remember watching Bakke, and most coaches sit in the coaches' chairs, and if they have two guys wrestling, one will coach on this mat and one will coach on that mat. Mm-hmm. I remember watching Gerry sit in the middle of the mats, coaching two guys at the same time. Come on, Zai, you shoot. Get easy down. It's like, how are you doing that?
But the refs would let him do that. And no one else could probably.
No one.
You tell him to go away.
you tell him.
Yeah, who's going to be the one to tell him to go sit down?
Yeah. I think we can tell this story. But you had talked about earlier. You had talked about how, when you coach with Gerry for as long as you did, and him being who he is, not everything is perfect. Mm-hmm. And kind of maybe a good example of that, which hindsight is kind of funny now, but an incident at the state tournament where we have a wrestler get disqualified from the tournament, and Gerry gets excited. Gerry talks to the media, and Dan has to bear a little bit of the brunt of that situation. So I don't know, maybe you can fill in the gaps of that.
It was the state semifinals, individuals, and we had a wrestler from Buffalo who had moved from another town because I think there was some conflict in this town where this wrestler had come from with another wrestler about in his weight. So they end up wrestling. So Gerry never wanted to be accused of recruiting, and he never did. But the coach from that team and that coach's predecessor talked to Gerry and said, "I really think you should take this kid on." It's like, well, this kid is really a high caliber, state champion caliber kid. Are you sure this? Can't you work this out over there? And it couldn't be worked out. So they end up he comes to Buffalo, they wrestle. Well, these two end up meeting in the state semifinals. So this is a
You don't know this
huge,
story?
I don't know the story.
a huge, huge match. So everyone in the wrestling community is kind of watching this match. So everyone in the Civic Center, there's thousands of people in there, and everyone kind of knows the backstory. They're watching the match. Well, the referee, they get towards the end of the match. The match is I think it's either 1-1 or 0-0, and they'd both been warned for stalling. Well, the referee ends up warning the Buffalo wrestler for stalling again with 4 seconds left or something. Obviously a ridiculous time to call it. You're picking the winner at that point.
Right.
And then the match ends, and he brings him back to the center. We're going to go overtime. And then obviously their coach comes out and said, well, no, he's
That's
been
a
warned.
second warning.
That's a point. And the referee goes, I don't, really? He said, I don't remember warning them. He said, I never would have done that if I'd have known. And then they bring him back to the center. So then in the meantime, we've got our wrestler in the corner, and we're, talking to him, and another one of the coaches at the head table, and then the referees are talking to the 2 head coaches, and anyways, they come back out and they raise the other, his opponent's hand, and the place just goes wild, and the ref said, I'm sorry, I never would have done that, and our wrestler is furious and ends up interacting with some of the members of his old hometown that are in the stands, and a number of things occur, and it just goes completely sideways.
Yep.
And as we're walking around so we're getting out of the Civic, you got to get off your mat and get back into the tunnel, and there's a place where the coaches can sit, and as we're walking over there, they announce that the Buffalo wrestler has been ejected from the tournament for his, he could have went on and took third.
But if you're that good, who cares?
Yeah,
He's champ or none.
Yeah, and he storms off, and in the process of storming off, does some things, and that gets him ejected, and we're super upset, and Jerry's so mad, and then we sit down, and we're sitting down in the coaches section, and he's just furious, and then at that moment, a member of the Minneapolis newspaper comes up, one of them, and says, what do you think? What do you think of that? And Gerry, of course,
Caught him at the wrong time.
Caught him at the wrong time, and he said, these referees think they're God, and and all this stuff gets in the newspaper. Of course, you take a kind of a pledge.
Not the Wright County Journal Press.
No, it was
which is a great paper.
Yeah. So this gets in the newspaper, and then this guy starts, because obviously as a coach you can't comment on officiating, and you certainly can't comment to the newspaper. So the head of the state high school, he of course reads this in the newspaper and immediately calls Nancy Burgert the next day, what is your wrestling coach doing here? What is going on here? And
who gets called into the office?
And then the next morning, I'm sleeping, and it's like I don't know. I'm sleeping. It's probably 7:30 in the morning, and I get a call, and it's Nancy from. He said, "What do you realize what Gerry said to the newspaper?" I said, "Well, we were sitting right there, and I don't know everything that he said to him, but he was going off on him." She said, "What were you doing? What could you possibly have been thinking? Why did you let him talk to the newspaper? Don't you know any better? How could you?" And I just read the riot act, and Gerry loved that story because he laughed. She basically told Gerry, "You can't. You got to know better than that." But for me, she read me the riot act, and I got completely reprimanded for Jerry's. And Gerry gets censured, obviously, then by the State High School League, but I got in huge trouble from the administration for Gerry talking to the
your fault.
Yes, it was my fault.
Your fault.
He loved how much he laughed. We laughed about that
eventually
in the weeks prior to his passing and visiting with him. We still laugh about that, about about me getting in trouble because I was always the one that had my hands on the back of his belt, pulling him off the mat. And,
right.
And so I was supposed to be the handler, and I didn't do a very good job. So
right. Well, I'm sure you got better from that experience.
Yes, I did. Yeah. I learned from there to do a better job. Right.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I don't want to like jump too quickly, but one thing kind of as in the last weeks that became like Gerry's really, really sick. It's pretty clear the end is near, but like being able to spend some time with him in those final days and then have, I was there when you were there, and talking and I guess without getting into detail, he's really sick, but the way he could turn it on.
Yeah.
And I'm sure conversations with you were similar, but of just like right back to naming names, recalling scores, telling stories.
When I was talking about that time that I was his TA and he had me tallying score books from the 70s, you got to realize it's written in pencil. So it's not you can't read it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, Gerry, I'm looking at the score here. It was 1974, Rick 8-4. Like, just the top of his head knew the score. I'm just like, that's insane. We should have got him on Jeopardy.
Yeah.
I mean,
right. Yeah.
Wow.
Wrestling Jeopardy.
Wrestling Jeopardy.
Of course.
Dominated one category.
Yeah. Actually, I can, and I kind of interrupting my own question to Dan here, but the best, one of the family stories I remember, you get the Bakkes and Benzers together for like a Thanksgiving or a Christmas. A lot of times a Trivial Pursuit game would break out. I didn't play very much because it's kind of like, I'm going to steal a joke here, but it's kind of like having a home run derby with Barry Bonds. Like, hey, Mark, you want to play? I'm good.
Yeah.
But I the thing I'll always remember is a ridiculously difficult Trivial Pursuit question would be asked. And then immediately upon hearing the question, Gerry would say, oh my gosh, this is the most. And then all of a sudden the wheels start turning. Kind of like, okay, well, if this happened then, and then that, and then I think the answer is this. Right. Just a lot of brilliant minds in the room putting things together. And he never lost that.
Yeah.
And so I guess those final, that last week or two where you were able to have some good conversations with him.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I answered the question that I asked.
He was still, we were talking about some matches and some wrestlers, and we were talking about Doug Bonk, and he had recalled Doug's match in '84 and who he wrestled and who he lost to the year before, and it was Farrell, I think, from Osseo, and but he could pull up all of that. One time we had a Bison wrestling parent who was having a hard time, and anyways, they needed to go look for this parent, and we thought they enlisted the help of my dad at the time, and at the time he and Gerry got together, and another couple of people got together, and they were running around because they were worried about him. And they thought, well, where might he go? So they thought, well, sometimes not a lot, but sometimes he'll go to the casino. So, of course, my dad would go, well, I'll take that assignment.
Yeah.
I'll go check that.
Yeah.
And this is at like whatever 10 o'clock at night. So they're at they go to the casino and they're looking around for him. They can't find him. Of course, my dad said, well, it wouldn't hurt if we just played a couple of hands while we're here. Right? We drove all the way up here. So he's sitting there, and they didn't spend a lot of time there, but they just literally played a couple of hands, and they're playing blackjack, and Gerry's standing behind my dad, and he's like going, they've all got their cards, and he's anticipating what the next card's going to be. He's like, face card, 3. He'd say hit. It'll be a face card, low card, and just like boom, boom. My dad just turned. He said, I just turned around. I'm like, because he was right every time. Like he could count cards, and it was just like amazing.
Oh, you can't count cards? Well, you should, because it makes...
And he's like, Dad's like, well, you should sit down. And he's like, no, I shouldn't do that. Like, that would be bad. Like,
Currently been banned by the gaming commission.
Like
it's a good thing sometimes he loves wrestling so much because
Yeah.
You're right. Who knows what it could have been.
could have been,
Yeah, he obviously had a memory that didn't quit.
No.
But he used his power for good, or whatever, if you want.
Yeah. Right.
If he had a superpower.
Yeah.
I think that's a great a point as any to really just, thanks for guys coming in and sharing those stories and just honoring a legend, and everybody still watching, you should be. But yeah, thank you. I mean, just kind of rest in peace.
Yes, rest in peace.
Rest in peace.
One last thing, this memory popping in my head before we go. Do you remember when he used to bring the exercise bike on the bus?
To lose, for kids who were overweight,
Yeah, but then he would ride it sometimes. I remember there were a couple of trips where I sat up in the front and watched him ride the bike.
Yeah.
Because
everybody made weight already.
There's a bike. Why would I just sit? I might as well bike.
Right. It was that or checkers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't even touch on checkers, but there was a lot of
3-time city champ.
multiple time. We'll just call it
Yeah,
that.
he was city champion.
City champion, which if somebody wants to get something started, I think we should have.
When has the last Buffalo checkers champ tournament run? I don't remember.
It wasn't in Buffalo City.
I'm just saying, like, most towns don't have that.
Well, we should. We should. But he would. Well, we can tell. He would gamble a little bit for charity.
Yeah.
So you could come in and throw a buck on the table, and and if he beats you, which he usually did, the money goes to charity. But if you somehow beat him in checkers, which killed some time on cold bus rides up to Alexandria on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
So
that and ping pong.
I'm not familiar with ping pong.
I think he was a ping pong city champion as well. I lose track of all the stories from the 80s, but he would sit on the bus, and when if you're a 7th or 8th grader, you always sat towards the front of the bus, and he just loved glowing in some of these stories, and he would describe this character he called Big G. And we were all like, who is Big G? Who is Big G, Mr. Bakke? Well, Big G did this, and then Big G faced this foe, and and then this happened, and then this glorious, victory occurred, and we were just all enamored with Big G. Like, someday I'll tell you who Big G was. I don't know why as 8th, 9th graders we couldn't figure out who Big G was, but they were all stories of his city checker championships and his and some of his ping pong.
There's some 45-year-old people going, you know what? I think Big G might have been Gerry.
That's who Big G was.
Man. Well, this podcast is kind of ending like a Gerry Bakke conversation ended, in that
you don't want to end it.
Maybe you try to end it, but another story comes up here or there, and I'm sure today as I go throughout my day, I'll say, oh, shoot.
Yeah, should have brought up that.
Should have talked about this or that, but like Tyler said, thanks guys for coming in. I couldn't think of.
Thanks for having us in.
Yeah,
thank you.
2 people to spent a lot of time with them and had a lot of conversation with them, and obviously there's literally hundreds of other people that could be here with us. But
I have a story.
We have a little bit of a.
Dan Gable was busy.
Yeah. Dan Gable didn't make the cut.
I thought he really got worn out from that plane ride, and he said, no,
not interested.
So very fun. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.